Welcome back to the BetCanada channel. Katie Caldwell and Jeff Lloyd back here with you. Jeff, one of the big talking points of the NFL this week, Teddy Bridgewater. So he has been suspended from Miami Northwestern for being one of the nicest, most generous guys on the planet. So the suspension comes from providing impermissible benefits to his players. These benefits included Uber rides, physical therapy, pregame meals, truly incredible things he's helping these kids in his community with. So, just to be clear, Teddy Bridgewater, a volunteer, not even a school employee, is being suspended for helping kids and doing good in his community. What are we doing here?
And first off, I think the issue probably is that not every school has somebody as a part of their program who
Hmm.
maybe has the deep pockets of a Teddy Bridgewater. That's not Teddy Bridgewater's fault. Okay. This is not
I
Teddy Bridgewater's
exactly.
fault. Now, what this also tells you is, obviously there's a little bit of a plight in the community, you know,
Hmm.
where, Miami Northwestern High School is. And unfortunately, some of these kids, and let's be honest, some of this is, this is basics. And, look, I'm not trying to, knock anybody's life. But, I have teenagers, they
Hmm.
need to be taken care of. I mean, the fact that, there's kids that can't get to a game, can't get to practice,
Yep.
are unable to basically, get the medical assistance that they require. And feeding them really? I mean, are we gonna question somebody offering to feed, obviously, a hungry teenager? Trust
Yeah.
me, my teenagers are hungry every 2 hours. You go through a lot of food, it's just the way it goes.
Well, let's
But
do
the
a quick
fact that
breakdown of
yeah,
the things that he has covered and how much. So, as per NFL insider Jordan Schultz, Bridgewater personally covered 14,000 for training camp, 9,500 for team pride sets, 2,200 per week for pregame meals, 1,300 per week for recovery, and 700 per week for Ubers, and then some. And then some, and he's being penalized for that. I think to see the numbers, because you're right, these things cost money. Not everybody has access to these funds to do these extracurriculars. To see the number of how generous he was being was really helpful context for me. But it made it a bit more unbelievable that, because you're right, like these kids got to eat, and not everybody is able to provide all these things.
and you look at that number and, if anything, it just once you put the number to it, I think you kinda get a better idea. It wasn't like, "Oh, hey, kid was starving, I bought him a Big Mac meal."
Yeah.
$2,200, but also you're talking about a high school, in Miami, and, a program like that probably could have 130 kids,
Hmm.
maybe. It's a huge
Hmm.
high school, $2,200 for a pregame meal, you gotta feed these kids. But, and what would these kids probably be eating if they weren't getting a proper pregame meal?
Hmm.
McDonald's, Domino's, nothing that is ever going to be on a pregame meal diet by any means whatsoever.
Hmm.
And, Teddy could have easily just never mentioned it. And obviously, I think once he asked for assistance from the public to help the program, obviously this is where this kind of took light and everybody kind of got an idea of, what actually Teddy was taking out of his pocket, for the players, to help with the program. It really seems a very, very weird thing to, get aggravated about. I mean, it's
Hmm.
just I mean, it's his money. This is what he is choosing to do. Teddy himself was a Florida kid, and my belief probably is that at times maybe things weren't as easy for Teddy Bridgewater as they maybe were for some others, and that's why maybe he kind of has an understanding of just exactly what's going on and the difficulties. Helping America's youth certainly seems like something I'm not going to start clutching my pearls over and,
Hmm.
giving Teddy Bridgewater a hard time. It's Teddy Bridgewater made a very good amount of football in football. And if he feels that, nurturing and, mentoring and physically and monetarily helping in the community is what he wants to do,
Hmm.
I you know, he should be applauded, certainly not suspended. I do
Absolutely.
understand I do understand if there are other programs who don't necessarily have the resources, or when I say resources, a Teddy Bridgewater
Mhm.
to offset things that are not covered under, normal athletic department type of things. But, that's my opinion is a advantage from Miami Northwestern. It's not
Mhm.
certainly, a disadvantage where somebody's pointing the finger. And if you look at it though, what essentially, because when something like this goes on, you say, well, how is it making it an unfair advantage for Miami Northwestern? The kids getting a ride to a game or the kids getting a ride to practice, I don't see that as being an advantage
Yeah.
for Miami. The kids getting proper medical assistance, I don't see where that's a overall advantage on game day. The
Mhm.
fact that they get to eat a decent meal before the game, again, this should be the expectation that kids are getting proper health care, proper
Yeah.
nutrition, are getting to where they need to go. I'm sure it's a problem at a lot of schools that they
Mhm.
can't offer all of these things. But that in itself is the problem. And that is probably why Teddy Bridgewater not only handed out the money monetarily, then went to the public and asked for public assistance. You
Mhm.
know, these are things that probably are going to end up in school board meetings and things of that nature. And look, everything gets bigger. And in states like Florida, in states like Texas, in states like California, Friday night football is huge. It is absolutely huge.
Yeah.
So something needs to be figured out. If it's a dollar or two more per ticket to the game,
Mhm.
a dollar more for the soda at the, whatever it may be. It basically what Teddy Bridgewater is telling all of us is, that the funding for high school football. And I know this always becomes a really hot topic because then you have to obviously equate into other sports. And
Mhm.
certainly everybody deserves a bump. All of these sports deserve a bump. And to be a really
Absolutely.
good program, you're now playing games out of state.
Mhm.
That's not as much as just, hey, let's rent a bus and we're driving out, 2.5 hours away. There's a lot more certainly that goes into it. Of course, in these economic times, it's a little bit hard to see necessarily where any extra money comes from ever. But
Mhm.
that is, basically what Teddy Bridgewater is telling you that the evolution of high school football is now requiring a higher economic demand. It needs to be revisited because this is
Mm.
how much money I'm just taking out of my pocket. And that's just doing the simplest of things of making sure the
Yep.
players are fed, medically taken care of, and getting to and from practice and games.
Quick pause. If you haven't subscribed to the BetCanada YouTube channel, you can do so below. It's free and it helps support our channel so we can keep bringing you NFL and NHL content. Now, back to the show. That's a good point, and I'm happy that it's leading to a bigger conversation about that. Is how can we make sure that these kids are more taken care of in these different communities? What message does this send to volunteers and to community figures trying to help these young athletes? Because one of the really great things about the NFL specifically, so many of these players, current and former, do so much for their community at different events and monetarily because they have the ability to do that more than you or I might be able to. What message does this send to these people that are just trying to help?
Well, I guess the message is, you better check your P's and Q's, before you offer to help because, you may
Yeah.
be viewed, as the demon as opposed to maybe the savior. And I think a lot of these guys, they're not even doing it to, for the savior aspect of it. And, a lot of it, I mean, look, what Teddy Bridgewater gave to Miami Northwestern from a monetary amount probably equates to what would be, the money he's got to give back to Uncle Sam at the end of the calendar year. So,
Mhm.
if anything, well, it's a deduction. Should I give it to Uncle Sam or should I make sure some kids who are hungry, kids who are injured, kids who can't get to practice? I mean,
Yeah,
again,
let me think.
we
Yeah.
have so many things. We have so many things in this world that we argue with and struggle with that, somebody who wants to step up, try to be a difference maker. It just seems really, really foolish. No, the league obviously they are always looking out for their product. So, hey, if there is a 6'4", 200 and 65-pound player who's a defensive end in high school football, but unfortunately, he's in a really tough home life with
Mhm.
financial issues. He's necessarily not getting everything he needs. There's a lot of things that can happen there. That kid could end up maybe deciding, this is just too much. I walk away from the game. Maybe I'm not doing anything with my life now. Now I don't care about a school as much because there's nobody writing me about my grades because I'm not playing. Do I end up in the workforce? Do I end up just taking, the wrong turn in life? And, 16, 17 years old, these are precious ages.
Yeah.
And, it's not no so much necessarily about the game of football, but it's about these kids. And, this is something I've always stood for. Like, people don't necessarily understand. There were kids whose academics have been in line because they were athletes. They
Mhm.
don't necessarily want to crack open the books, but, no grade, no play. So, the importance of doing well in school allows you to do the other aspects. And look, this is just something, and look, does some more money need to be thrown at it? Where do you find the money? Those are always the difficult, and that's obviously way out of you or my pay grade.
Mhm.
But the whole scenario that Teddy Bridgewater here is telling me is that the funding for high school sports stinks. It's just not enough. Maybe the Uber rides might be a little bit more or something like that, but basically more needs to be done. And, the business of high school football has obviously gotten a lot larger than anybody has anticipated over the last decade or so, but it's not going to stop. So that means these needs for these kids is going to continue. And, it's about time, somebody doesn't turn a blind eye to it anymore and they kind of maybe take it a little more serious. No kid leaves hungry is, been a line that's been around forever. And obviously that's something that needs to be, addressed and taken a little bit more seriously.